glorious night when Dane Cook returns to the Island Event Center. You can see his legendary style of stand-up comedy live at Treasure Island Friday, October 24th. All the details are at ticasino.com.
Aaron Gleeman is with us in studio this is, I guess, the official 2025 baseball season debriefing as it pertains specifically to the Minnesota Twins. As we say hello to you, welcome back, thanks for coming in. I want to read you, I don't know who sent this out, but it does, I think, raise a larger subject. I'll just read it as it was written via X.
Okay.
MLB having quite a night as season winds down. Judge hits 50th and 51st home run. Raleigh hits number 59. Guardians continue AL Central takeover. Reds tie game in bottom of ninth. Phillies hit 8 home runs. And as I'm reading that, I'm thinking, I didn't know a lot of that. I'm not sure I was paying attention to much of it at all, in part because I admit I tend to be someone who disconnects as soon as the local baseball team is disconnected with the larger MLB world. You pay attention not just to the Twins, but to the larger MLB world.
Theoretically.
Because that's, at least to an extent.
Yeah.
And so that does tell you there's some damn good
it's been
baseball
an amazing
stories
season
down the stretch here, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's been an amazing, the Judge Raleigh back and forth for AL MVP. I think
which you wrote about. You wrote about him. Did you write about it like 3 months ago?
Yes. And I had someone remind me of that. It made it into the New York Times. Because the New York Times will take some of the athletics features and run them in their sports section, like the actual sports section. So I wrote a thing about Cal Raleigh in like early July, maybe.
Right.
And as soon as I filed it, I'm like, I'm going to jinx this guy so bad. Like, this guy's going to hit 120 down the stretch. So I'm happy to say even my jinxing powers are no match for the amazing seasons he's having. But yeah, I mean, you got Brewers as the number 1 seed probably in the NL. You got the rest of the AL Central is very interesting. I mean, I think it's been a great season. Unfortunately, it's been one of the worst seasons ever for the Twins. And specifically, like you said, basically since the trade deadline, since August 1st. There's been very little reason to care about the Twins unless you are a diehard, hardcore fan, or you're someone who has to care about them like me. But yeah, I think probably a lot of people locally are similar, and I'm assuming people tune back in for the playoffs. And I think just looking at the matchups, I mean, if it ended right now, you'd get Red Sox, Yankees in the first round just to advance to play Toronto. I think you'd get the 2 Central teams in the first round. Like, it could be a very interesting, even just AL side of the bracket.
Did I see Schwarber hit his 56th last night?
He's a monster.
Tell me about the home runs. So now, are we seeing, if I missed this too, are we seeing a bunch of home runs again? And what's that about?
It's interesting because, like, the league-wide, I mean, look, we're still in one of the more homer-friendly eras ever, but it's not like we saw in like the late 90s, early 2000s, where all of a sudden the entire league exploded and you saw McGuire and Sosa and like that. But yeah, I mean, you got a catcher hitting 60. You got Schwarber, who's been an all-star level kind of slugger for a while, hitting potentially 56 or more. You got Judge, who everyone's so focused on Raleigh hitting 60. Judge is going to end up with like 53 or something like that, which is like ho-hum for him. He's already had that 3 or 4 times. The league-wide rate hasn't exploded, and actually, like 2019, when the Twins hit the most ever, it was a higher rate at that point. But yeah, we've had like a handful of guys just go absolutely crazy with home runs this year. I think this is a pretty good synthesis of what we get from lots of Twins fans, those who are still moved enough to text. And this comes from Saul in Blaine. And he writes, I know the Vikings are the A topic, but as a 44-year-old baseball fan who watched a lot of bad baseball in many of those years, this is probably the most hopeless I have felt about the team. The ownership having the team for sale gave the fan base hope when they did the trade deadline fire sale and said they were keeping the team. That was a gut punch. It's going to be tough hearing rumors of trading Lopez, Ryan, Lewis, maybe. And after finally having his best season, Buxton. We are now in the ranks with the A's, Pirates, and Rockies, ownership groups that do not invest in their squads. That's Saul in Blaine. So I don't think you're surprised to hear that sentiment. It's tough to even pick one thing out of that to argue with, really.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is unfortunate. I think what he said at the end there, where the fear really is that, the Twins have obviously been one of the lower spending teams for decades. But there's a big difference between ranking 21st out of 30 and ranking 28th out of 30. And the teams he mentioned, Rockies, Pirates, that sort of thing, A's. That's the fear, is that it can always get worse. And from a Pohlad standpoint, their payroll right now, like baseline payroll in terms of arbitration figures and guaranteed salaries, heading into next year is under $100 million. And as the question also said, or the comment also said, Lopez is making 21.5 next year. If they trade him, you're at 70-something million. If they trade Ryan too, you're at 60-something million. I don't think they'll cut it, to the bone to that extent. But they could. I mean, I wouldn't push anything past this ownership group at this point. Like, how can you? First of all, we've seen 4 decades of it and 3 generations of it. But beyond that, we've seen what they did at the deadline. We've seen, like we said, the carrot that they wagged in front of everybody of, well, we're going to sell the team. Actually, no, we're not going to sell the team. And at this point, in terms of how far the payroll can drop, I wouldn't put anything past them. And that's the scary part, is like, the Twins are never going to outspend people. The Twins are never going to go out and sign a big-time free agent. They did it with Correa once. They're not going to do it multiple times year after year. That's just never going to be in the cards. But there is a big difference between ranking, 21st and spending $140 million and ranking 28th and spending $75 million. And it just creates a situation where you need everything to break right for you. And we see it, one team every year, basically, in baseball rises from that bottom 5 and maybe even makes a run. But you have such little margin for error. And also the Twins have proven that they're not particularly good at a lot of this stuff. So it really, I don't disagree with anything that was said there, that it really is. I mean, I've covered this team. The first year I wrote about them was 2002. I was in college, and now I'm old. So I've been through a lot of this stuff. And, I covered a lot of very bad teams and a lot of disappointing teams, even good teams that disappointed in the playoffs. But I think, and I tweeted about this from the ballpark as I was leaving the final game I covered on Sunday, this is the least enjoyable team or season that I've ever covered. And maybe there's some recency bias. I'm still kind of in it with that. But I mean, the weird part was, even like 2016, where they lost 100-something games, Terry Ryan got fired, all that. That was a miserable season from start to finish. But this one was weird, and I thought particularly like depressing, in that they were kind of mediocre till the trade deadline, and then they just gutted the whole thing. And I feared that it would be this bad over the final 2 months, and it has been every bit as bad as anybody could have ever expected. And it's just like, what is there to care about? What is there to write about? And I think part of it also is the roster isn't even really overflowing with young guys. They have a lot of these kind of seat filler, AAA, 32-year-old veterans, and that's fine. Like, those guys deserve chances too. But there hasn't even been that much to point to over these last 6 or 7 weeks when the team's going poorly, but you at least hope to be like, well, this guy, and this guy looked good for next year. Keisha looked good, although now he's hurt. Austin Martin's looked pretty good, but he's kind of a role player. Guys like Cody Funderburk could be like a middle reliever, but there isn't that much kind of building block guys that you can point to.
So the Twins have to be aware of what is being said and written about them at this point. Maybe they don't care, but it's difficult for me to believe. I guess what I'm saying is, all of the speculation you offer up about how low this could go in terms of payroll and who they're going to be committed to and who they're not, they have to, I think, do they not at some point, whether it's the owner or whether it's the president of baseball operations, whatever fancy title he has, isn't it on one of somebody in this organization, if indeed the plan is, no, we may not spend as much as you think we want to, or we should, but we're not going down another $40 million. We have a plan here. Right. Is no one going to speak up and address those issues? I'm gobsmacked that even if you want to be a cynic about this, strategically speaking, somebody in the organization needs to kind of lay out the plan, if indeed there is a plan, no?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Typically, so I would be surprised at this point if Joe Pohlad speaks to the media, because I was in the room when he spoke last year, final day of the regular season, and those quotes blew up, and everybody, he's not, if he does speak to us next week, let's say, I would give him all the credit in the world. But my assumption is he will not be, because he's been very, very scarce. Yeah, I don't think he's given a single on-the-record media interview in the 12 months since then. In terms of Falvey, who's now, by the way, the dual team president, one of the highest profile most powerful executive positions in all of Major League Baseball. He runs the baseball operations, which he has been running, but now he also runs the business side, taking over for Dave St. Peter in March, I think it was. He typically talks probably next Tuesday, next Wednesday, a couple days after the regular season ends. And he'll do that. I mean, it's not a matter of whether he'll be available for a room full of reporters.
It's about what he'll say.
Right. And I mean, I can tell you guys this. I will ask him about the payroll. He knows that. I ask him the same annoying questions every single year that I've been on the beat. I will ask him, and I will ask him again, and I will try to get him to give some. But I do agree with you that if they aren't going to further slash the payroll, you know, it was 160 something 3 years ago. It's been 130 something the past couple of years. You know, the thing is, 160 3 years ago is basically akin to 185 now, because everything just keeps rising across baseball where they've gone backward. If they are even going to stay in that 130 range, which will put them like 25th out of 30 teams, but still higher than kind of skeptically, I'm assuming, it would benefit them, I think, from just a pure PR standpoint, to say, oh, we're not slashing this further. Like, it's not going to be where you guys want it to be. But they've been pretty hesitant to do that.
Why is that, do you think?
I don't know.
Because they are really considering it? Because that's what it leads to, is you can speculate endlessly down on the basis of their own pattern here, and I don't know how they don't understand how damaging that is if they don't have anybody willing to say, look, we have our limits about how high we're going to go, but we're not. It's not like our plan is we're going to gut this even more than we did at the trade deadline, and then we're going to basically decide to have silver linings in the year 2028.
I think part of it is if you overpromise and underdeliver with that, you get in trouble. But I would just say in general, my view, and I mean, who am I? I'm just a guy who writes and talks and stuff, but I'm not a businessman. My view of how you would want to communicate with your customers, particularly at a time where the morale of those customers is rock bottom and has been for a little while now, seems to run counter to how they view it. Like, they seem to lock down further the worse things get, whereas my approach would be to be overly communicating and laying things out and doing town halls and issuing statements that aren't just AI written, but they clearly do not take that approach. I mean, that's become clear over decades at this point. So that does confuse me. Like, why are you trying to just go into lockdown mode when things get bad? But here's another thing that I will say. In terms of like approval rating, if we're going to look at it like politically or whatever, they're at, negative 99.
They are.
Part of me worries that, because I get questions all the time. Are they going to trade Lopez? Are they going to trade Ryan? And some people are like, well, they can't do that because then everybody will be even angrier. Part of me worries, how much anger can it get? Like, have you reached such a low level in terms of fan interest, fan morale, season ticket sales, television ratings, all that stuff, that you're almost in a weird way freed up to do whatever you want to do because you only have a sliver left to drop? Like, you're at the bottom. You're at the bottom of the ocean already. Like, how much deeper can you go? And maybe that's just an overly cynical way to view it, although being overly cynical has been pretty accurate here for the past couple of years and really the past 40-something years.
Yeah, that's a scary way to think of it. Somebody had texted me a link to an MLB stats item that Sonny Gray had reached 200 strikeouts for the third time in his career, and he did the proverbial Barrero, we didn't need him, because he knows I like running that into the ground, and then I retweeted it. But it did jog my memory, because I don't think you and I have talked much lately about the Gray saga. Now, you could say it's way in the past, and to a certain extent, what the hell's the difference at this point? But because Joe Ryan brought it up again, which I found pretty interesting, I do want to ask you a couple things about it as you look back, because at the time, I think my recollection is it was spun as if he really doesn't want to be here. So let's not kid ourselves. We really don't even have to try to be competitive, even if we want to be, because he really wants to be someplace else. St. Louis is a baseball town. He doesn't want to be here. And I look back on that now and listen to Ryan, and I'm thinking, well, maybe he might have listened. Ryan wanted to at least believe that he was interested at least in staying here. And I don't think the Twins ever were interested in making a competitive offer there. And you can almost, a lot of things have happened since, but you can almost trace it back for him to that's where the whole thing started unraveling a little bit, that we didn't even really we being him talking, we didn't really try to satisfy him and bring him back here. So what do you remember about that saga, and how instructive is it today?
I think that's what you said is half right and half, and not wrong, but not my experience. The half right part is they never made any effort to re-sign him. From the moment they traded for him, they traded for 2 years of him. The plan was get 2 good years. He walks as a free agent. You get a first-round pick as compensation, which is exactly how it played out. And he was really good for. Yes. He was great for 1 year and very good for the previous year. I don't think they ever thought at any second in those 2 years, including the offseason when he actually did depart, that they were going to make a competitive offer. It's my understanding they didn't make a competitive offer. The flip side, though, is I don't think he had any problem here. I think people read into him being very competitive.
But innings, right?
Willing to show his emotions on the mound.
Yes.
And then after every game, it would be, Sonny, you were removed after 6. Yes. Do you wish you would have stayed in there? And there is, first of all, there's no pitcher who says no to that. But in particular, Sonny Gray would always say, almost always, yeah, I would have liked to face one more batter or whatever. And the quick hook Rocco stuff, even though that ceased being accurate a while ago, people read into that of like, he can't wait to get out from under a
right,
Rocco.
Exactly.
Here's what I'll say about that. Couple things. One, I never got that indication, and I think they actually had a pretty decent relationship. 2, he goes to St. Louis. He hasn't been as good in St. Louis. He's been kind of mediocre in St. Louis, which he's now in his mid-30s, so that's somewhat expected, which played a part in why the Twins weren't interested in signing him to a long-term deal. He's averaging almost the identical innings per start in 2 seasons with St. Louis that he averaged in 2 seasons with the Twins.
After all that.
And I also have read that we have a great Cardinals writer named Katie Wu for The Athletic, and I read her stuff a lot. And there's so many similar quotes after a 5-inning start where Sonny Gray will be like, hey, I'm not trying to, say anything, but I would have liked to start the 6th and go out there. And it's like, man, I remember this. I can also give you an update as of this morning. Sonny Gray has not quite requested a trade, but will be traded. It sounds like. Because he has 1 year left at 20-something million. Right. They're not going anywhere. They're going to be slashing payroll, which they already did last year. He's now 35. If the Twins wanted him, they could go get him. I don't see that in the cards. But yeah, it's been I don't blame the Twins for not wanting to give a 33 or 34-year-old starting pitcher a 3-year deal for $25 million a year. I think in general those are a mistake. And like I said, his performance has been okay, but not at that level for the Cardinals.
Same level.
But I also think, and they got a draft pick for him, and we'll see what that guy turns into and all that. But I'll also say this. He left at a time when they were slashing payroll by $30 million, and he basically got $25 million. They were never going to sign him, even if payroll had remained in that 160 range. Once it dropped to 130, that was like, well, how could we sign him? Correa's already making 30-something million. Lopez is making $21 million. So I think that's one of those situations where people can read into wherever they sort of lean on that. If he had some big beef with Baldelli, that wasn't my experience. But yeah, it is interesting because it's also one of those things where they may have made the right decision in not giving him $75 million, given how he's performed with St. Louis. But also they didn't attempt to replace him, and they slashed payroll, which is kind of what Joe Ryan's getting at, which is like, well, that just left a gaping hole in the rotation, which we attempted not to fill at all. And we've seen the rotation really struggle.
You've nailed it. Now, Guardsy and I have talked about this, and maybe I don't pay attention enough to pitching contracts of starting pitchers. But I never thought in this day and age, $25 million sounds like a lot, but
it's not a crazy.
I think it's as much as it used to be, even if you have some awareness that he may be starting to fade. But the bigger issue is what you just said. You can make the argument, but then you have to find a way to replace, at least in theory, what he might represent. And they, as you say, made zero effort to do so.
Yeah, they're going back to 2024, which was the first year without Gray. Their big plan was Chris Paddock was going to be healthy and was going to be the veteran stepping into that rotation. And he ended up not throwing a pitch after the All-Star break, wasn't all that good, was ineffective again this year, and then got traded to the Tigers, got demoted to the bullpen right away by the Tigers. And some of their young guys have gotten hurt, haven't stepped up to that extent. And then obviously you trade away the whole bullpen, and the Lopez is out, and this, last 2 months have been a mess for the pitching staff. So I don't know. It's a tricky spot. You hate to lose a guy. He was runner-up for Cy Young Award.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was an all-star. And having him and Lopez atop that rotation gave a feeling of this could be different. And in fact, it was different. They won their first playoff series in 20 years, although Gray did not perform well. It was really Lopez carrying the weight in the playoffs. Gray pitched poorly, really poorly at home against Houston in what kind of ended it. But it's tough to let a guy of that caliber walk in any sport for money or not money and just be like, yeah, we're just going to backfill that spot with, guys who cost a third. And they just have not succeeded in that. And I think that is, we can talk about the ownership, and nobody's written more about payroll and ownership and all that than I have. So, but ultimately a lot of this comes down to all these prime aged hitters, these 25 to 29-year-old hitters that they had, Larnach and Royce Lewis and Wallner and Julian and Miranda. They flopped collectively, individually, and then all the pitchers who were supposed to be coming up, the David Festas and the Zebby Matthews and other guys, have gotten hurt, have been mediocre, have been inconsistent, and what you're left with is some good veterans. I mean, Buxton is having a spectacular year. He homered twice today. He's playing at an MVP type of level if it wasn't a year where two guys were going absolutely crazy for MVP. Joe Ryan's been pretty good, although he struggled at the end. You've had some good performances, but the core of this team has just been proven to just be kind of an empty shell here so much that ownership, payroll, that all matters, but there's no ownership payroll aspect of player development. You got to hire coaches, but they're not making tens of millions of dollars. They've just failed to sort of developmentally push these guys to the next level. And in a lot of cases, guys have taken one or two steps backward, where you're left in a spot now this offseason where it's like, how many of these 6 or 8 core hitters do you even believe in as part of your core?
Aaron Gleeman in studio. We're going to pause here for the Vikings report and a couple of other things. And when we come back, we'll get to the Rocco question, which I know that you have spent some time on via your podcast, Gleeman and the Geek. I want to talk Rocco, which is always a hot button issue for many of our texters. We'll get to some other baseball items, Twins related, attendance included, in just a minute right here in the fan.
You can join KFAN's Justin Guard, nice guy, Sunday morning at Gray's Food Hall. Kegs and Eggs, stop by. 8:30 is when we open to catch the Purple as they play their first game in Ireland against Pittsburgh. Plus, enjoy great food and your shot every quarter to win awesome prizes. You can get the full details at KFAN.com, keyword calendar. See you at Gray's Food Hall, Minneapolis, Sunday morning.
What is going on with ESPN all of a sudden, the 4-letter network? Did you see what they just had on TV?
I watched one of the anchors and some women trying to
they had
catch
a bunch
food in their
of
mouth.
scantily clad women at a college.
LSU.
Was it LSU?
Not that I was studying it that close.
Yeah, what else did you see, Gleeman?
What did I just admit to? Sorry.
People were like throwing candy and they were trying to catch it in their mouths.
Maybe
what's happened to ESPN?
They're trying to reenact the Mardi Gras bead throwing situation, maybe?
It felt frighteningly like that, actually. You're right about that. Aaron Gleeman is our in-studio guest until the top of the hour. Top 5 at 5 yet to come as well. If you have questions for Mr. Gleeman, Bradshaw and Bryant KFAN text line is 64686. The Rocco question. Mm-hmm. According to the texters we've had for years, he should have been fired 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm not here to say he's untouchable. And I don't know. I can argue that some of the things we've heard from players, allegedly about culture, would indicate maybe some dissatisfaction with the whatever is the parameters that Rocco has set. And yet I see the gutting of the roster, the bullpen, all the other issues you named regarding the talent. And I go, I don't know, man. Does his strategic approach have that much to do with any of it? But I know you've talked about it, you and the Geek, a lot. So give me what we should cover in your mind, the pros and cons on Rocco, and where you think this might be headed.
I mean, I think at the baseline level, they've missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years now, and 2023 being the exception. And they only won 87 games in 2023, but they won in the playoffs. So it's a very successful season by their standards, for sure. You missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years. You collapsed last year, one of the biggest collapses, although we might be seeing a bigger one this year with Detroit. But one of the biggest collapses you'll see, going from 90-something% playoff odds in mid-August to 82 and 80 and missing the playoffs. Then that rolls into the mess of the first half this year, trade deadline, 90-plus losses, the gutting of the roster. A lot of managers don't make it out alive of that. Just the missing 4 out of 5, let alone the collapse and then further collapse. But it's also true that a lot of front offices don't make it out of alive on that too. And the front office has been there 2 years longer than Baldelli. Baldelli's been there since 2019. They've been there, Falvey and company, since 2017. But I almost think you see how this works in every sport. First, the assistant, when it goes bad, first the assistant coaches go. We saw that last year. They fired all 3 hitting coaches. Well, they're worse offensively, and the guy they fired is in Toronto. They're doing great offensively, Popkins. Thad Levine, who had been their longtime number 2 guy, the GM in the front office under Falvey, he mutually parted ways last. So we saw that. Okay, well, that's not quite a shakeup, but that's something. But now it's an even worse season. You've lost 90. The pressure to go up the ladder from the blame standpoint or accountability standpoint, however you want to phrase it, he's the next logical guy. I mean, could you shake up the coaching staff again? Sure. Bench coach, hitting coach, something like that. Could you reassign or part ways with another, number 3, number 4, number 5 front office guy? Yeah. Is that going to satiate anyone from a fan standpoint? No, nor should it at this point. And I wonder, though, from a front office standpoint, and I've got no indication that the front office is in any danger, Falvey specifically. Like I said, he got promoted to a much more powerful role after last year's collapse. And if they're not in danger, if Falvey's not in danger, well, then Baldelli is the shield, right? Whether you think he deserves it or not, somebody's going to have to be held accountable for what's happening. You would think. Although part of me wonders, do the poleheads even care? We talked about it last time. Like, if they view this as it's as low from a morale and interest standpoint as it's ever going to get, it can't go any lower. You're zeroed out. And if you don't expect next year's team to be good, which I personally do not expect next year's team to be particularly competitive, why bring in a new guy just to get him sullied by that mess that's going to be next year? Whereas you've already paid Baldelli. They already picked up his 2026 option on his contract. So, it's a very tricky situation because you have an ownership group, the domino effect from which the slashing of payroll has hurt the front office, and then that in turn has hurt the roster, which in turn has hurt Baldelli. And the truth is, if you're going to fire Baldelli now, you essentially fired him on July 31st because you gave him no shot to do anything but lose miserably for the final 2 months once you shed 40% of the roster.
Well, that's why I wonder if that might save him. As odd as it sounds, right. Whether he deserves to be saved or not.
Where there's what do you expect them to do? Yeah, I mean, I think that if this is just pure speculation, but if the Pohlad said to Falvey, do what you want to do, we're not going to do, he would keep Baldelli.
You think he would?
I believe they are very close, have been the whole time. I believe he still thinks Baldelli is a solid manager, but I also think that if there's any indication from ownership of, look, Falvey, your job's safe, which I think should be in question too. I mean, but setting that aside, but we need some change here. Well, the moment they say that, Baldelli's the guy you hold out at that point. Now, could they keep Baldelli and make much smaller changes that aren't going to get fans that interested, really? Yeah, I mean, there are members of the coaching staff they could part ways with. They could reshuffle some things, player development-wise or front office-wise, but that's kind of what they did last year. And I just wonder, how long can you go without change? But that also assumes that the Pohlads care, at all, really. And I'm really starting to wonder if that's the case.
So translate for us the comments that Pablo made not that many weeks ago. I think, the cliche, the culture is a kind of a cliche term, but what do you think he was talking about? Does that enter into territory having to do with whatever tone the manager sets? What did you make of all that?
Well, so a couple things I'll say about Pablo Lopez. One of the nicest dudes I've ever met. Not someone who's really ever going to rip anyone on the record. I've talked to him about this sort of stuff after that because, like you said, that was a few weeks ago. My impression from talking to him was he was saying more, we need to kind of reestablish a culture now that Correa's gone, now that the bullpen's gone. And that's incumbent upon me and the other leaders, and there aren't that many veteran leaders at this point left, and it's incumbent upon Baldelli. And maybe there's an opportunity there to kind of reset, change how we do things. It's a much younger group, so that some of the things maybe you are going to try to do to motivate veterans don't really work for guys who are in the majors fighting for their careers at this point. I didn't take it as him ripping. That's not to say that players haven't made comments about the situation. The other thing I'll say, though, is there's never been a 90-loss team that collapsed the year before that thinks the clubhouse is great.
Yeah.
And for rightfully. And, Joe Ryan's made some comments. Pablo's made some comments. Royce Lewis has made some comments. I'm not dismissing that. I don't get the sense that they dislike playing for Baldelli, but I also think there's a freezer burn sometimes that comes with managers. Buck Showalter was always the famous example. He would come in, he would take over a bad team, they would immediately get way better, they would make the playoffs for a couple years, and by like year 3 or year 4, people were like, I am so sick of Buck Showalter. Then he'd go do it in another place. Baldelli's not that type of guy. He's not a Bobby Knight type of manager. No. But missed the playoffs 4 times in 5 years, people start to look around and go, what's keeping us from doing this? And that's part of the job of the manager. I mean,
how much do they owe him? That's my other concern. They don't want to pay anything more than they need to at this point. Didn't they just extend him?
Well, so he had a option on his contract. He was entering his final guaranteed year this year. And when they went on the winning streak, somewhere around that time, they privately, without any announcement, picked up his 2026 option.
Why did they keep that private?
Well, one might assume they weren't real happy with what the reaction would be, maybe.
I see.
And then when it did get revealed a couple of months later, Dan Hayes of The Athletic found out and reported it, which he should. He did a good job on that. It was the worst possible timing ever because at that point they had gone in the tank. Yeah. And people were like, what do you mean they picked up his option? Not realizing it happened like in late May or whatever. I've gotten a ton of questions about that. And because I think there's the notion that, well, the Poleads aren't going to want to pay 2 managers. They're not going to want to fire a guy, pay him a salary. And like I said, I put nothing past the Poleads in terms of penny pinching.
Point, no.
However, what I will say is the majority of major league managers who are not, 3-time World Series winning Hall of Fame guys, and Baldelli, I'll include in this, are not making that much. They are making less than, backup money, middle reliever money. They're making millions, but they're not making 10 million or even 5 million. And so I've got to assume that if they feel strongly about making a change and it being Baldelli, that owing him, 1.8 million or whatever it may be, I think it's somewhere in that range probably, shouldn't be a major factor in that. But, $1 million here, $1 million there. I mean, they just let go of a bunch of pro scouts, 4 guys who couldn't have been making $500,000 combined. And that was, portrayed as a money-saving thing. So, but I do think this decision will not be driven by a couple of $1 million, or at least you would hope it's not driven by that.
All right, I got a lot more that I want to cover in our final segment. You brought up the Scouts story. I want to follow up a little bit on that. I do want to get to some of the attendance issues, which you have written and talked about extensively as well. And then a couple of good texts have come in regarding the investors, the mystery investors, and where they fit in and when we might find out who the hell they are and why the hell they want to be a part of this madness as well. Aaron Gleeman is in studio. We got one more segment with him. I think now we're going to get the Vikings report, right, Guardsy? I'd mentioned it earlier. I kind of jumped the gun. So you get a little bit of Vikings material. We'll get more Vikings material in the top 5 at 5. They're headed across the pond tonight, right?
Yeah, I think in about 20 minutes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
About 20 minutes from now. A lot of the Ink-Stain Wretches are already there.
They are. Seaford has already had multiple Guinness.
Yes, and has let us all know.
Which I would have.
You would have, wouldn't you? That's true. I don't think they have wine coolers in Dublin. When I was there, I asked for that once, and they looked at me, and they threw me out. They just said, go. We don't want you here, Yankee. Wine cooler. What are you talking about? I do the joke because people want it from me. I actually haven't asked for a wine cooler in 20 years. I'm that smart, at least.
Time now for the Vikings Report on The Fan, presented by Miller Lite. Vikings wide receiver Adam Thielen joins Dan Barrero next. And
all right, back-to-back questions came in regarding the investors, Aaron Gleeman, who's with us in studio for one more segment, from 763 Guy and... from Brandon in New Mexico and Dan from Maple Grove. Brandon says, are there really investors or is this bullcrap? Dan asks, what would be in it for these mysterious investors to buy into the Twins unless they have been assured that the club is going to try to compete? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they've been assured of that. How could you assure them of that? I think what's in it for them is that baseball teams, and we've seen this pretty much in every sport, there's such a limited number of them that become available, and they appreciate year over year, decade after decade. I mean, the Poleads, Carl Pohlad bought this for $44 million in the 80s, and now it's worth $1 billion something. And we saw the Wolves too. I mean, in the time Taylor agreed to sell it until the 3 years later when he actually sold it, it doubled in value. It's almost like owning a painting, where it's like you may not make money day after day.
While you own it.
But when you do go to sell it, you will get double, triple, quadruple what you're getting. And so buying into that, I think, is appealing. I also think there's just a lot of rich dudes who just want to be a part of this and want to be able to say they own it and go to a party and be known. And the Poets have benefited from that over the years, obviously. Like, oh, you're the guys who own the Twins. I think there's a lot of that. And I think there's a lot of people who have hundreds of millions to invest in that thing, but maybe not $1.5 billion to invest in that thing. So it's a way to get your foot in the door. And I also wonder if they think, well, we're buying in because this team was $400 million in debt. Our money is going towards wiping away that debt by all accounts. What is stopping them from accruing a similar amount of debt over the next 10 years, at which point they're going to need more money, at which point maybe we could go from 20% to 40%
right.
and kind of barge our way in there. But I think that's it. In terms of, do they exist? Yes. Who are they? They've done an amazing job keeping that not known. I think the timing of it, I know people are like, well, it's been 6 weeks. Where's the news on this? I think you're going to see the names come out because there's going to have to be paperwork and voting at the owners' meetings, which I believe are either during the World Series or right after the World Series, something like that. So in the next month or so, then you're going to see, because people are going to have to approve them, people are going to have to file paperwork. That'll get out eventually. There was some indication that the Twins kind of pushed this through when it was at the 1 yard line instead of in the end zone, and that's been part of the delay where the investors are like, whoa, we weren't quite ready to like put out a press release on this thing. That's just what I've heard off the record on stuff. But yeah, it is going to happen. We will eventually know the names, but the timing of it isn't a shock because I think it's a situation where there's no incentive to let people know until you have to.
The Scouts being let go story. Garzi and I talked about this when it broke, and I wondered whether, based on the story, it was Hayes, wasn't it, who wrote it,
yes.
among others, right? Dan Hayes.
Yep.
I don't know if he broke it or not, but I remember reading his story.
Yep.
And when I got done reading it, I'm thinking, does this fall into the classification of PDS? Is this Pollad derangement syndrome? Because the story did seem to indicate that even though it's true what the Twins were doing, and it's hard to give them the benefit of the doubt financially for all the obvious reasons, that in fact they're following the trend throughout Major League Baseball. So does this fall into the classification of, it's not a great look, but the fact is this might not have anything to do. They might not mind saving more money, but that in fact a lot of teams, for better or for worse, are going away from this sort of scouting anyway.
Right. And they had already, so they didn't count what people normally think of as scouts. They didn't cut. What people going to high school games, college games, trying to get draft picks, what they cut was the pro scouting department, which is guys looking at other major league teams. And it used to be you would send those guys on the road all year, and if you wanted to take a look at the Phillies, you would send them to the Phillies, and they would tag them for 2 weeks and watch all their games. That's become more video based because why travel? You can get everything on video.
Sure.
However, I will say that leading up to the trade deadline, there were a ton of pro scouts at Twins games at Target Field who I talked to, and they were there to see in-person stuff because you can still notice things in person, pre-game, post-game. You can talk to people about what kind of guy this is, what kind of worker he is, that you can't just get purely off video. But the guys they fired, the 4 guys they fired from the pro scouting department, had already shifted largely to video over the last couple of years anyway. You're 100% right that it is a trend across baseball to have fewer pro scouts on the road, seeing teams in person, having more of them on video, and then within that, teams are just cutting back on that because you can give those responsibilities to other departments once there isn't the travel component. But what I will say is the majority of teams still have multiple guys in that department. There are some teams who have actually leaned into it more, seeing that like we can zig when the rest of the league is zagging, and we can pick up some of these guys who are really good have been fired, but B, it's just an area where we can find a small advantage and really push it to a bigger advantage. You are right in that if the Twins were about to make the playoffs right now and they had just spent $175 million on payroll, nobody would care. But when you roll this into everything else we've seen and the 40 years of reputation of the Pollads, I think it is an example of a thing like, really? At this point, like it's one of those, it's a bad look. I also think it's not saving that much money. I mean, if we're being honest, these guys are maybe making $100,000 a year. These are not like super well-paid positions. Yeah. It's a lot of grinding. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of travel, that sort of thing. But they've also not really expanded their analytics department to keep pace with the rest of the league. When Falvey came in 2017, they blew it out because there wasn't really an analytics department under Terry Ryan, and they really invested a lot of that. I feel like I've heard from people I've worked with in the past when I was at Baseball Prospectus or in other front offices, and are saying that the Twins are kind of standing still in that regard while other teams are running past them. And so you fold all that stuff in with the payroll being slashed, and it's just like, where are you? The thing I wonder about them is, where do they even perceive themselves as having an advantage at this point? Because it's not scouting like it used to be under Terry Ryan. It hasn't really been trades, free agency, pro scouting, all that. Like they're dialing back some stuff that you would think could be an advantage at a relatively expensive price point, but also pitching development hasn't been there. Like we talked about last segment, the prime aged hitters have all taken a step back for, and that's the difficulty, because they're not going to be in a position where they can spend their way to wins. I mean, that's obvious. And so I just ask, what do they even think they're good at? Like, where are they getting an advantage over the other 29 teams? And I think this is an example of one where it's like, well, that could have helped. Like, it's not cutting 4 of those guys may not matter that much, but it's certainly not making them better.
Speaking of bad looks, what about the revolution your podcast partner started regarding these perks, these frequent ticket buyer
John
perks?
Bonus.
What do we make of that story? Yeah.
So the very short version was season ticket holders throughout the year, they accrue rewards points, which you can use for memorabilia, autographs, jerseys, and hot dogs, beer, whatever. So everyone has these points. They show up for the last homestand of the season. John Bonus likes a beer. I don't know if people know that. He thought, well, I'll drink for free this weekend. And he went to go get to sign up and use the points for beer, and all the concession stuff was gone. All the other stuff was gone, and all that was left really were autographed memorabilia items from traded players. So you could get a Carlos Correa jersey, you could get a Griffin Jax autographed baseball, and he was like, what is going on? And so he talked about it on the podcast. He went on the power trip and talked about it, and the Twins actually called him up and said, thank you, we're going to fix this. And they did fix it for the last few games of the season. But again, a great example of penny wise, pound foolish, but I don't think this is them saying we need to save money. I think what happened was they got up to their budgeted whatever giveaways.
Can't make it
They
up.
thought there's a homestand left. Let's just cut that faucet off, and nobody will care. And obviously fans care. And it's just one of those examples where it's like, if you're doing the big stuff poorly on the field, which they have been, you at least think you got to really focus on the small stuff, and there's just been no indication of
Or the
that.
small stuff's going to look a lot bigger for all those reasons. Last item, we're running a little late. I wanted to get to attendance. You've written about it a lot. Have you projected, or can you project, in terms of like season ticket sales, is the bottom about to drop out? How bad is it going to be? What do the projections you think realistically look like for next season?
I will note that they used to answer questions and give you season ticket numbers, and they ceased doing that once the season ticket base started to shrink. And now they're at the point where even I've heard from people, and I've written about, indications it's this amount, and they'll be like, well, that's false. And I'm like, well, okay, what is it then? Oh, we can't say
Can't
that.
tell you.
So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
The bottom has fallen out of season tickets. This kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier, where they're so low with all this stuff that even, worse morale isn't going to take that big a chunk out of it, because there isn't a chunk to really take out of it. I mean, when you start to see 10 or 11,000 people at games, that gives you a pretty good indication of what the season ticket base is. It's lower than that, obviously. I think the other thing that people tend not to realize, they looked at the games down the stretch and they were like, how are they still getting 23,000 whatever? People hate this team. One, that's announced attendance, which is tickets sold, which about 80% of those are sold before the season starts. You can't unsell those tickets. And then the other thing is, attendance tends to be a lagging indicator. In other words, in 2023, the attendance rose a little bit as it became clear the team was good, but the real jump was in the next season. When people are excited about the team that just ended, they sign up for season tickets. So we saw a decline. It was about a 14% year over year decline from post-trade deadline last year versus post-trade deadline this year. That's a lot. I mean, over the course of a season, that's like 200,000 tickets. But the real impact of it will be when they try to sell people season tickets for next year and packages for next year. You're going to get a lot of people dropping out, which I've heard from tons of people who have, I've been a season ticket holder for 20 years, I'm done. But then also, how are you going to convince any new people? And so it dropped by like almost 10% this year, 180,000 compared to last year. For lowest in the history of Target Field, actually lowest since 2000 at the Metrodome.
We quoted that
which
story.
was the year before they tried to contract the team. That's how bad it's gotten in terms of ticket sales. But I think the real decline will be next year, when you see the lag effect from how frustrated everyone is this year. And, they could get to 1.6, high 1.5s, which is just I mean, that's bottom of the league. That's with the Marlins and teams like that.
Texter writes, Gleeman needs to be on the show more often. He's one of my favorites despite the awful team he has to cover. It's been a great hour. Yes, Guardsy and I talk about this all the time, but you're hard to book.
Was that sent in from Judy G?
I don't think it's 651 area code.
Could be.
Could be.
She's a big fan. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I am hard to book.
You're hard to book.
Yeah,
we got to work on that, man. We love having you on.
I'm one of those gals who likes their significant other to schedule date nights in advance, not just that afternoon go, you want to come over?
Yeah.
That's really, I think JG even said that. Yeah, he said that to me one day. He's like, all right, 3 weeks from now, you want to come in? I'm like, that sounds good. He's like, thank God.
Guardsy, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's fair. Gleeman, what's the best way to say this? I don't even know.
I play hard to get?
No, you don't play hard to get, but you've done a very good job of setting your own boundaries.
Yeah, you have, and I guess that's to your credit.
We know.
But
that's a recent thing.
We're selfish, though. We don't care. We don't want you to be so good at setting your boundaries.
What happened was I was so bad at that for so many years, and I would end up in this chair for 4 different shows in the span of 2 days.
Yes.
Don't pick any of the other shows.
Well, yeah. And I would be like, boy, I should be full-time employee here. The way and Abbott would be like, okay, buddy.
Yeah.
So then at some point I just thought, you know what?
You mean Chad Pollad?
Yes, Chad.
That's what you're talking about?
You said that, not me. But yeah, I enjoy doing the show.
Great having you.
If you give me more than like a day in advance
we'll
warning,
work on it.
I can commit to giving you strong maybes most of the time.
Okay.
Well, and you're feeling better, right? I mean, you were having, you couldn't walk around for a while.
Yeah.
So
the spine's doing a little better.
Spine's better.
I'm slightly less fat, which is not saying that much.
State Fair T-shirt. We're going to put that on there.
That's not a bad one.
Slightly less fat.
That could be a real seller.
That could be very good. That's true.
I need a percentage of that, but yeah.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
Anytime.
Aaron Gleeman, great stuff. We'll do top 5 at 5. It might be truncated a little bit. We are guest free the rest of the way. I'm assuming we'll have Vikings. What else?
Vikings injury report. Byron Buxton had a very nice day for himself financially, and some Wolves broadcast nuggets that people have been eagerly awaiting for.